Hello all and welcome back. I hope everyone is doing really well. Of course, finally SaucerSwap v2 has gone live on the Hedera Hashgraph testnet. So this is not live on the mainnet currently, meaning you can't access it with any of your mainnet real account funds to trial. However, it is of course on the testnet. Testnet accounts on Hedera are free to open and they do get funded with some initial HBAR as well. Of course, it's all made up, or wooden dollars, so to speak. It's not real. It's of course in a testing environment. So of course, if you guys are playing around with testnet accounts, make sure you don't try and send real funds to testnet accounts. We'll be demonstrating on the testnet in this particular video. And as I mentioned before, this is completely open to anyone. It's a full open beta. There's no restrictions of using this. I will leave the v2 testnet version URL because it is slightly different down in the description. And of course, as always, make sure you are double checking URLs, etc. when you are visiting platforms like this. Nevertheless, this video is going to be looking at these new CLMM features, or concentrated liquidity, as opposed to amalgamated sort of liquidity, in terms of providing that and the differences, the perks and benefits, and also how we actually enter those positions and manage those positions on the new SaucerSwap platform. First things first then, actually looking at it visually, we can see there have been a few different changes. And I mentioned this in the previous video when I was talking about why is a CLMM important, or why should I really care about a CLMM. But as we can see here now, underneath the liquidity tab, we've got SaucerSwap v1, which is still the AMM protocol, as well as SaucerSwap v2, which is the CLMM protocol. A really hard and fast rule that I like to use when it comes to AMM versus CLMM, and why we'll see them continue to probably exist side by side for a long period of time, is an AMM is really, really good for sort of novices that want to get into and provide liquidity to earn some of that APR. And a CLMM is for people that are a little bit more or more so experienced in the world of providing liquidity and want to do some different kind of strategies. It's a bit similar to people providing or doing options trading in the equity market as opposed to just buying and holding stocks. That's kind of the way I like to compare them to one another. What we can see though immediately from this particular interface is there's a lot of different stuff going on here. One of the first things is the analytics tab is now been pulled through to the front page of these different pools, and we can see it being displayed live. So we've got the volume for the 24-hour, weekly, as well as things like the liquidity in those particular pools. You've got the 24-hour fees generated by that particular pair, as well as the annual yield for that particular pool. So we can see here, if we hover over the question mark, total 54.49%. That's being generated from the fee APR. And of course, the fee APR is based on the weekly average trade fees that we are currently seeing in these given pools. Of course, at the top section, like any other great UI, you can click on these different buttons to filter down the selection we see beneath. So if I click SaucerSwap v1, this is only showing me SaucerSwap v1 pools. The other little icons you may have seen as well, the 0.3% is of course the fees for the particular pool, and then you've also got this little cow symbol, which is rewards available for that particular pair, which effectively means you can get additional rewards for participating or providing liquidity to those particular pools. Right then, and of course my pools if you're inside any of those. So I remove these filters and we take a look directly at the SaucerSwap v2 pools. We're going to look at playing around with providing some liquidity to a HBAR source pool directly. Once we jump into this particular screen, again, we can see the depth chart now, which is one of the mainstay features of a CLMM. And of course, it's showing the current price of 0.263 HBAR per source token that we currently see. And of course, we can flip that round to the other way around. So 3.802 source per HBAR, whichever you're more comfortable reading, as of course, a currency pair has two different exchange rates depending on A to B or B to A. The main thing here is, of course, we're natively in the statistics tab. You've got a My Positions tab, and of course, you have a new position tab. That's something that we're going to jump into immediately. And we're going to get into the effective volatility strategy, or that's what SaucerSwap Labs are calling it, of where we're going to generate our own volatility strategy to provide liquidity instead of just providing it under an AMM. Before we do that though, I wanted to jump in and just take a little bit more of a closer look at what an AMM is in contrast to a CLMM, again, just to make sure you guys are 100% clued up on what you're actually doing here. Because as I said, this is something that's a little bit more experienced than just a generic providing liquidity on an AMM. Here's a quick couple of sort of slides I put together for this SaucerSwap v2 testnet release. Just to explain a little bit more over on Twitter when I actually dropped this. I think I dropped it on YouTube as well, but I'll put it in the video for you guys because it sums up the differences really between AMM and the CLMM quite succinctly. Man, it's difficult to keep saying those M's all together. So what we can see here is, of course, the V2 protocol is a beta, and it sees the launch of a CLMM protocol alongside the AMM V1 protocol. Nothing new here in terms of, if you watch my previous video, you'd understand exactly what's happening. And of course, 28th of October, Saturday, was when this went live on the testnet. Now, if we look at the differences quickly in terms of the liquidity distribution, which is what we're going to be talking about here, an AMM effectively is a homogeneous, which means consistent distribution of liquidity. So we can see here it's uniform and flat in shape from the price of 0 to infinity. It's homogeneous or mixed together really well. It's flat, it's uniform across that particular range. There is only one bar. Conversely, the CLMM, or concentrated liquidity, begins to allow the liquidity providers themselves, which is us in this case, to decide in which range we want to allocate that particular amount of liquidity. Typically results in a shape that is centered around the current price, a bit like a bell curve or a histogram, to capture as much of that volume and fee as possible. And we can see here we effectively end up with a histogram with different blocks of liquidity per price range for a given pair. It's heterogeneous in distribution, which is different to a homogeneous distribution. The main advantage of this that we tend to see is increased liquidity depth and capital efficiency. So we saw, again, on one of my other infographics, up to 4,000 times capital efficiency. It tends to be a win-win scenario for all parties, primarily due to that increased capital efficiency we've seen before, and you've got the increased depth of useful liquidity. Whereas if we go back to the AMM scenario, we effectively have a infinite distribution of that uniform flat shape, whereas here we can target the depth of that liquidity based around the current price. Headline benefits then, up to potentially 530% increase LP yield, 16% roughly rather than 3%. And of course, a CLMM protocol as well allows you to have different strategies and create non-uniform liquidity distributions, which of course, again, as I said, this is one of the main reasons why I said this is really for advanced users. And of course, playing around in the testnet is a really safe way to explore this first before you guys jump over into the main net, which I am a massive advocate as to why SaucerSwap Labs themselves have dropped this on the testnet first for an open beta. Cool, so now we understand the differences a little bit more between the two. The last thing I wanted to touch on was impermanent loss in CLMMs, because it gets a little bit more complicated than just an AMM, and there's a lot of maths behind this, but really we wanted to take away the headlines. So here is actually the formula that was derived effectively for the end result for impermanent loss in a V3 or a CLMM for a range that spans from, say, price A to price B. So in this instance, let's say we have price A and price B. ILK is the impermanent loss for that V2 position that covers the full range. But what we need to know here is for any N, which is the number of buckets effectively, characterizes how large the range is. I'll demonstrate this in a second for you guys to give you something visual. But for N equals 2, for example, you have a range where the starting point of position A is half the current price. So let's say the current price is 10, your position A would be 5, and your position B would be double that endpoint. So you end up with 5, 10, and say 20 for your effective liquidity provisional range. So if the price falls by 50% or grows by 100%, you'll still be earning fees across that range. You're setting the range to effectively earning those particular fees. But simply put, the impact of impermanent loss is probably higher with concentrated liquidity, even for a fairly wide range. And the takeaway, the key point here is the narrower the range, i.e. when N is smaller, the differential between PA/PB, the bigger the impermanent loss. However, that is when you have the highest amount of capital efficiency, and that is when you're going to earn the most amount of fees. So the closer and tighter you are to the current price, the bigger the impermanent loss, because of course you're moving outside of those bounds. The wider the range is, the less exposed you are to impermanent loss, but you're not going to be earning as many fees. And that is the risk trade-off you are effectively taking when you are playing around with this particular style of liquidity provision. Okay, then jumping back over, let's actually run through a particular scenario. I'll try and zoom in here for you guys a little bit. Let's jump this up to 125%. So in this HBAR source position for providing liquidity, of course, we have some dedicated liquidity strategies or volatility strategies here. We can go for focus, which prioritizes those high swap fees in a narrow range. So you can see here, they've automatically generated a really narrow range for me of plus minus roughly 5%. And we can see our min price and max price here, to which once we effectively move outside of those min prices or max prices, so if we see the HBAR per source exceed 0.27601 or drop below 0.25074, we effectively get converted 100% amount of impermanent loss into the other token of this particular pair. So we see here we have a high chance of seeing some impermanent loss because we're only trading within a 5% range of the current price. However, this enables us to earn a greater percentage of those swap fees because majority of the transactions are actually taking place within this particular range. And that's where you can see all the liquidity actually being provided. The depth of the liquidity is being used up within this direct range. Of course, we can go to a more balanced strategy here, a middle path strategy. This will still earn us really well, but does require a little bit of oversight, and you can monitor this semi-regularly. Here you can see our min price and max prices have increased or decreased on the min price and increased on the max price. And we have a slightly wider range here of minus 14% and plus 16%. So we're not as tight to that white line of the current price. We won't be earning as high a percentage of the swap fees that are taking place. However, we aren't as exposed to impermanent loss in this instance because we still got a wide range for that to take place. Of course, you've got a relaxed version here, which effectively takes the full distribution for the chart that I'm zoomed in on. If I zoom back out, plus 35% and minus 26% of that depth chart in that scenario. And then of course you can go full range as well. This really isn't, I don't think, incredibly efficient, but perfect for the long run. Lower swap fees, but always remains in range, set, relax, and earn. So in this instance then, let's just go for a relaxed version. Of course, you can drag these around yourself and come up with your own particular strategy. But in this instance, I'm just going to set a relaxed strategy for providing liquidity to this HBAR and source pool. I'm just going to do 50% of the tokens. Again, this is of course the test net. So, you know, this is not real money effectively. It's just what's been added to my testnet account. Don't forget down here, you can play around with your slippage amounts. You've got things like show stats in the settings tabs, etc. I like to play around normally of 0.1% to begin with. And of course you can change that as you see fit. Approve and mint position, just going to come up with a ton of different stuff here. And of course, over on my Hashpack wallet, it's popping through. Effectively just going to hit approve on each of these and you're going to see it work through. And this is part of the new UI changes we've seen with SaucerSwap Labs. And it's a great UI change showing the different smart contracts that are actually taking place. So you can see here, I've just had an error for whatever reason taking place, contract revert. Let me just see if I can refresh that transaction. So interestingly here, potentially this is because my slippage is too low. So let me move that back up to 0.5%, which I believe is the default. Of course, this is on the testnet. So you saw there I was getting a contract error because my slippage was set far too low for the particular pool. Upping that back to 0.5%, fix that immediately, which I believe is actually the default. Cool then. What we can see now then is I've entered into this particular position. You can see my deposits of token A and token B, so nearly 2,500 HBAR and 9,500 source tokens. You can see here my min price, your position, that purple bar will be 100% source at this price, a maximum almost impermanent loss or opportunity cost into one direction. And then the max price of 0.3551, your position will be 100% HBAR at this particular point. And then of course it's max impermanent loss effectively into the other direction. Cool. What we can see here then is we can obviously claim fees at any given point once I've earned some of those fees. So of course I've not been in the pool particularly long, so I haven't got any. I've got a price range breakdown here beneath showing me I'm in range to the current HBAR per source price. And we can see min price, spot price and max price. At any given point, we can decrease or increase our liquidity, which is a nice thing we can do. So I can just literally drag sliders around and remove liquidity from the particular pool. And the same for increasing my liquidity. I can just go and add more tokens. The thing to bear in mind here is you're going to add tokens to the same strategy that you had set previously. Of course, there's a nice new drop down here as well under the approve and add liquidity. We can either do a one-time approval or we can do a max approval, and we don't need to give it approval next time we want to do this transaction. Rolling back out then, if I come back out to the main tab of liquidity, we can now see under my pools where I have provided liquidity. Under my positions as well, this remains here. And again, we can see if I've got any unclaimed fees. I can start a new position at any given point with a different strategy if I want to have multiple different strategies to offset or hedge positions for providing liquidity for a particular pair. Or of course, as we saw, I can add and remove liquidity from those positions. Hopefully this is giving you guys a bit more information as to how this works, as opposed to SaucerSwap V1, where effectively we just provide the tokens to the pool. And as we saw in that sort of slide deck that I showed you guys, that goes from price 0 to infinity. But in V2, we have the option to distribute our liquidity across the active range that is taking place for those token ranges. As I mentioned before though, be aware that this is for more advanced users, and there are more pitfalls and traps associated with staying in the range of the current price to ensure you're continually earning those fees. You want to be as close to the current price as possible. Therefore, as we saw on the SaucerSwap recommendations, that you need to effectively monitor these positions over time, because as the current price jumps around, your position that you're providing liquidity to, your min price and max prices need to be adjusted to suit. That wraps up this video then before it gets any longer, because I could spend all day. Like I said, I've tried to simplify this as much as I can into almost layman's terms for you guys without going too heavy into the maths and the different information regarding it. It is a bit of a rabbit hole, and like I said, it is a little bit more complex, but I urge you guys to play around with it on the testnet because it does give you advantages over just an AMM. Of course, if you feel comfortable, the great thing that SaucerSwap have done here is left the V1 protocol around, so you can decide to pick and choose how you want to actually provide liquidity to earn some of those fees. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like. You can also subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified, as I will be releasing a couple more videos when it comes to this change for V2 on SaucerSwap Labs, as well as other content regarding crypto and Hedera. Until the next one, I'll catch you guys then. Cheers.